It's Wednesday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're joined today by Nick Farabaugh. We're both in Indianapolis at the NFL Combine, where Omar Khan spoke Tuesday. We want to talk about the big things he addressed, the quarterback situation, George Pickens, and a future for the offensive line that has Broderick Jones at left tackle. All that and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And we got to remind you this show is joined by Nick Farabaugh from PennLive.com. Nick Farabaugh is back. Nick and I had a busy day on Tuesday talking to Omar Khan, not once but twice, because he talks to Pittsburgh media in private, and then he talks to everyone else after the fact at the podium. But one of the big things, of course, that had to be addressed, the quarterback situation. Before we get really into things, Nick, let's let Omar Khan do the talking for himself. Here was Omar Khan when we addressed him before his podium session.
I think ideally, like to sign one of the guys that we had last year. But the reality is they're both free agents. So until we get one of those guys under contract, all options are on the table.
Was the feedback from them that they're as interested in a return as you guys?
I believe they're interested in coming back.
In your mind, is it one or the other? Is there a scenario where both end up back in Pittsburgh?
The way I look at it, it was a positive experience with all three of those quarterbacks. I don't know how realistic it is that all three will be back. But if there's an opportunity for there to be a combination of, a couple of those guys to be back, we'll be happy with that.
Might you consider looking outside? Might you consider outside?
Jerry, until we have someone under contract, all options have to be on the table.
Is it a desire for you to have a deal done before free agency, or would you be okay with letting those guys?
No, it's an ideal scenario. You'd like to have this done before the start of the league year. Obviously, that who you sign impacts, the type of receiver, you may go after, or how you build the rest of the team. So all that has an effect.
Did you tell those guys that so the Steelers can move on?
Yeah, I think they understand that. They want to. I truly believe those guys understand that. We want to put whoever the quarterback is under center in the best position to succeed, and for us to add pieces, that's the first part of this.
Now, Nick, there's a lot of things that you got to read the tea leaves for through, but I think one thing that I didn't include there that I did think provide some actual insight was that he did admit later that they want to figure out who their quarterback is before free agency opens up, right? And to me, that's definitely you should, but that's the main major thing to glean here. But Omar Khan is not trying to paint the Steelers into a corner where they have to go with Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. It should either one of them choose to not want to be with the Steelers next year, and their things get in the way. He's trying to keep things pretty clear. I still think the Steelers' top option is Justin Fields as far as what they feel internally and what they actually could do right now. But him saying all options are on the table, I think shows that the Steelers are just preparing for the worst and hoping for the best at this point, which is the approach that you should have when you're dealing with one of these situations.
Yeah, I mean, it is, right? And when you look at what we've just heard from Mike Tomlin, Art Rooney, and Omar Khan, it's all pretty consistent, right? Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, you want to sign him before free agency. It makes a ton of sense. They want, I think, some continuity, right? I think that's something that they want just because – how many times have they switched over the quarterback room? There's been so many changes, right? You went from Ben Roethlisberger, Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, all these names swirling on. I think they want some continuity there. And they're also, when you're talking out in the open like this, you need to maintain some leverage in contract negotiations. When you are in active contract negotiations with both quarterbacks, which they are talking to both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, as he said, you don't want to tip the scales one way or the other, right? You've probably heard a lot of, the Steelers are interested in Russell Wilson more, or interested in Justin Fields more, the Aaron Rodgers, Matt Stafford stuff. But it's all kind of floating around there, and the Steelers can't really tip their hand at which one they want. So there's a lot that goes into it. But I'll tell you what, Omar Khan has done a great job, especially as it relates to quarterbacks, at kind of saying a ton of nothing, as you said, which is what I always have said, he's getting pretty good at GM speak, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of it, Nick. Like you want to be sure that you're not putting your cards out there on the table. And there's going to be other parts of this conversation, the conversation that we had with him, that he does that in. But that's the thing here. So what we do as reporters often, like when we're reporting what's actually happened, we're just reporting, hey, this is what he said. The initial part is just quoting, making sure that you guys see what we see. But then the real work comes as far as trying to say, okay, what can we decipher from what he's saying that does indicate something? Because clearly, if we were to ask, okay, Omar, just get real with us. Do you want Justin Fields over Russell Wilson? Do you? Come on, man. Just tell us the truth. You're not going to get results like that. Because they're not going to answer those types of questions. So what we have to do is we have to keep asking questions and poking. Hey, what are your preferences in this situation? What are your preferences in that situation? And talking about wanting to preferring that they'd be able to sign one of these guys before then. That at least lets you know, hey, probable timeline, getting things done. But something that my colleague Ray Fittipaldo pointed out that I think was very accurate when I did the North Shore Drive podcast with him, tune into that with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette the same way you get this podcast by looking that up. But he pointed out, he's like, hey, this is probably all still predicated on how much money Matt Stafford gets wherever he goes, because there's talks that he's going to return to the Rams and how much money that'll come in. And Matt Stafford is probably the guy that that every other agent out there is going to base their quarterback contract on right now. So they're going to wait until that happens. And so I think that was a good observation point by Ray. And I think that that's something that you can look at here and say, like, you know what, that might be the holdup, is that both of the agents for Justin Fields and Russell Wilson are waiting to see, okay, what is the market for my client? How much money could I actually get for, if we were to go to the table for the Steelers right now versus maybe in a little bit later when Matt Stafford sets that contract. And so the Steelers, I'm sure they'd love to get this behind them so they can move on to the next project. But the reality is these agents, these players, they're trying to make the best out of it themselves. And this is why it's a big negotiation game, and also why the Steelers are doing everything they can to not show their hand at this stage of the negotiation process.
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, Stafford in and of himself changes the market play. What if he's moved from the Rams, right? If he goes somewhere else, maybe the Rams open up as an option for one of Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, or one of the teams that is in on Matthew Stafford wants Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, but their plan B to the plan A that is Matt Stafford. All this stuff kind of is the dynamics you're waiting for. And so the Matthew Stafford stuff is probably the first thing we're going to hear about. That certainly sounds like, I would say, from what we've kind of heard, is going to be finished imminently, whether he's traded, whether he's signed, whatever. It feels like that's not going to drag along into the free agency period. I think we're going to figure that out pretty quickly. And so, listen, Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, not only do they want to see what the market's going to be, they're going to want to see what teams they're going to want. They're going to want to evaluate those teams and those fits potentially on top of the Steelers' offer. So all of this comes together to kind of circumvent where this is going to go, right? And so the Steelers, honestly, I mean, we very well might see, if Stafford is traded or signed in the morning, it very well will not be that surprising to see the Steelers sign their quarterback in the afternoon. Like, that is how quickly this could probably go. I think that's a pretty astute observation when you look at it. And because these two guys, outside of Sam Darnold, I mean, they're honestly probably two of the top 5 guys on the open market. So, I would say that, it's probably Darnold, Rodgers is going to be in there, these two, and then, I don't know, you throw in maybe Kirk Cousins or something like that, depending on where he goes. Or if he's just going to stay in Atlanta because they said he might today. We'll see. But all these things kind of come together. But it will drag out a little bit. But honestly, as long as that Stafford stuff doesn't continue to kind of muck it up, I do think the Steelers should theoretically be able to get this done before the 10th. I don't know what actually happens if both these guys hit the open market. I think that makes the Steelers' job a lot harder, because I thought another big thing Omar Khan said was your addition is going to be tied to this. I think the allotment that they can put on corner and defensive line in free agency or any other position, it's tied to that, because how much cap space do you have? Do you need to cut this guy? Do you need to cut that guy to create more room? Do you need to restructure this guy? All of that stuff is tied to the quarterback contract.
Absolutely, and I think that's the thing here is that this is why I said on yesterday's episode when I was previewing this and saying, hey, we're going to ask these questions. Don't expect the answers that are going to let you go to bed at night knowing like, hey, I know what the Steelers are doing at quarterback. What you're doing is you're building up the clues to get the context clues to see, okay, this was their plan, and then also evaluating when they execute their plan that whether or not, okay, this matches what they were saying or does it not. Because again, last year, this time when we asked them about the quarterback situation, they said that they were confident in Kenny Pickett, and then they signed Russell Wilson and then traded Kenny Pickett away shortly after that. So there's a lot of factors into it. But there's another player that Omar Khan talked about that I asked him directly about that he also expressed confidence in, and that was George Pickens. I want to talk about what he said about George Pickens and how to read into that. I'll do that with Nick Farabaugh next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter here with Nick Farabaugh of PennLive.com. Nick, let's get into what Omar Khan said about George Pickens. He didn't make it long, but I did think it was interesting that he addressed it in this way. Here was Omar Khan when I asked about George Pickens' future with the Steelers.
Speaking of receivers, George Pickens is entering the last year of his rookie deal, and typically when you guys have a guy like that, they've done a hold in or something's happened there. What's the outlook on you guys' plans for him moving forward with the team?
Sure, I had a really solid exit meeting with GP, and I can tell you that he has a desire to be great. He has a desire to be great here. We have a desire for him to be great and to be great here. We'll see, with respect to the contract, we won't discuss that publicly, and usually those things are addressed at a later date.
So Omar Khan saying, hey, he wants to be great and great here. We want him to be great and great here. All that lines up that, like, man, he calling him GP. This looks like it's great for the Steelers and George Pickens. Things are going to be peachy keen. But, Nick, there's a part of me, I'm not saying he's definitely gone, because there's some that believe that, like, for example, Ray and I talked about it. He and Jay Dulac believe there's no way that George Pickens gets an extension with the Steelers. And some people may feel about that. I've been very up in the air about it because I still see the talent that he has on the field and what he brings to the Steelers roster. And until they find those another future star wide receiver, I feel like it's tough to say goodbye to that right away here, right, Nick? But again, could this be when you listen to him say that, when you were standing right there with me when he said that, did you get the impression that he was being honest there? Was that another GM type answer where he's trying to just protect the true goal here, which is maybe to flip George Pickens, if not during this offseason, during the season close to the trade deadline, for a big return like he got for Chase Claypool a couple years back?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty consistent with Mike Tomlin and Art Rooney's answers. I do think that consistency across the board is something to always pay attention to. Again, I don't really think they're going to trade George Pickens unless, and I think this is the wild card of it all. I agree that I don't think they're going to extend him. And so if they go to George Pickens and say, we're not going to extend you, what does George Pickens do? I think that's there's a reaction to everything, right? Does he hold in? Does he hold out? Does he request a trade? Does he just show up and go with it, right? I don't know. Like, what is the question there is going to be the big thing. Like, that's the answer to this. So, I mean, if he holds in and we have Pickens watch every day, like Ayuk was last year, I mean, that's a little different than if he just shows up, works. So I think that's the big thing. But I think right now, I just don't think they want to rebuild the wide receiver room in one offseason. And I understand why. It's a deeper wide receiver free agency class, but a lot of the free agents, they're veterans with questions or they're coming off injuries. Even the trade candidates, right? Deebo Samuel, Cooper Kupp, Christian Kirk, all those guys have questions. They're not long-term answers. On top of that, it's just hard to rebuild one room like that in one offseason, especially when your one guy under contract next year is Roman Wilson. You have no one else under contract past this year other than Roman Wilson. And so that is significant. So the Steelers are probably going to try and set themselves up to fix the wide receiver 2 position this year, plus get a draft pick that could maybe replace George Pickens or replace Calvin Austin or whatever. So they have a future need and a current need in that room. And so trading George Pickens, I mean, that makes that room very hard to upgrade completely. And so I think that is why you keep him. He's also very talented. I think there's no question about the talent of number 14 in black and gold. There never has been. It's just going to be, can he actually realize all of it? And, I think they're going to look for that. But I think very much that Omar Khan is being earnest in a lot of this here, but it's not always up to him, right? I mean,
right.
We saw last year, and I think I'd use this comparison. They believe in Kenny Pickett. Well, they signed Russell Wilson, and Kenny Pickett says, all right, I don't want to be here anymore. He gets traded. I don't think they wanted to trade Kenny Pickett, but that's what he wanted. And sometimes to an action, there's a reaction. And sometimes the team does not have control over what that reaction is. So always think about that.
No, I think it is part of it. And again, that's why I think they're playing the quarterback situation so carefully, because you don't know how one guy is going to react. Remember, the Browns are stuck with Deshaun Watson because when they simply talked to Watson and let him leave Cleveland, the simple act of talking to him made Baker Mayfield mad, and he said, I'm out of here. And then they had to sign Deshaun Watson. So I think it's prudent upon the Steelers' part to just not tip your hand. But the same thing goes for George Pickens. Now, Nick, I want to press you on this a little bit here. So you're not for trading Pickens, during this stretch here, and you're not for extending him. Are you saying the Steelers should carry him to the end of this season and then just let him hit the free agent market, or franchise tag him, or do something like that?
I mean, I think that's probably what they're going to do. I think what I would do, I'm explaining their logic. What I would do is I would probably explore the market, see what you can get. I mean, listen, this is a guy that around the NFL is regarded as a volatile player. He just is. We've heard the reporting, right? We've seen it on TV. He gets into, a scuffle with Greg Newsome. He pulls Jordan Lewis down by his face mask. He has $90,000 in public fines. He was fined $200,000 by the team and the NFL last year. Like, there is volatility. Even if you are a George Pickens fan, you have to understand that he has a reputation around the NFL. And so even though he's young and he's clearly talented, and I think he's a borderline number one, he's a 1-2, high-end 2 type of wide receiver that has one upside. You have to understand that. And so the Steelers, what are they going to get on the open market? Because this guy's not only going to need to be traded for, but he'd be getting a big contract with that. And, if I'm George Pickens, I mean, I'm looking at the contract, I'm not taking under 25 a year. So a big contract to take on. And often those guys go for depressed prices as a result. Now, we'll see, but can you get a second or a third? Maybe, but that's a question in of itself. But I think what they're going to do is they're going to try and ride this out and give him another shot, because if he does kind of rein back the volatility and we see a focused, more mature version of himself, he has a chance to play himself into a long-term deal. But I think that there are questions about that. And I do think there are certainly questions about taking him on an expiring deal into training camp. Because, again, what's the reaction going to be to that? If their plan is to basically draft a guy, sign a guy, and he requests a trade, and you have to trade him, you're back where you were. So it's a risky proposition. So I think there's different things that I'm trying to explain. What will they do? What's the logic behind it? And what will little different, but I'm just trying to kind of give you guys a picture of this with George Pickens. It's a tough situation because I see both sides of the coin there.
No, I feel you on that. And listen, again, I'm not saying you're wrong for feeling the way you feel. I just wanted to make sure that people understood your position there, because, there's a lot of hard feelings about George Pickens around Pittsburgh. There's a lot of people that think that you can't win with that kind of guy. There's a lot of people that think you can't win without that guy, because you need that kind of a playmaker. And that's why this is such a back and forth issue. I'm telling you, there's probably a war in the comment section of this video on YouTube right now if you're watching it. And it's been up for a bit, but talking about Pickens, I think another factor here to keep in is the idea that what if the Steelers, they kind of take your approach, right? And they carry that into the season, and then they wait and see, like, hey, through 7 weeks, it has George Pickens been the kind of leader that you want? Has he cut down on the antics? Where's the team at? Are they playing well right now? Is he part of them playing well? Is he setting the right kind of example? Is he showing growth? Because then if he's doing those things, and you're thinking, all right, you know what? Maybe he's fine. Maybe you can keep him around, and then you can sign him to a deal after that. Maybe he's finally shown his growth. Or if he hasn't done that and you're still feeling the same way, then you can get to being saying, all right, trade deadlines here. Let's see who's desperate for a wide receiver, because I still think the most significant move that Omar Khan made to start things off was his going and trading away Chase Claypool and finding the way to turn that into the first pick of the second round. And if he was able to get that for Chase Claypool, I'm not saying that he'll be able to get something like that for George Pickens, but man, that still proves to be such a really just an insane move that he pulled that off in the first place. And I would think that, hey, maybe they can take advantage of someone else, another team's desperation in that stance to make something happen.
Yeah, and 2 points I'll bring up. I think there's validity to both sides of the coin. Like, I think there's validity to moving on from him. I think there's validity to saying they can't lose him. I think both have some real truth in them, which makes this position quite hard to be in. I think Steelers are just in a tough spot with what they did at the wide receiver position. The lack of what they did last year, I think, continues to come up as just a bite, right? It's like, you wish you had another option. But the second thing is, I'll tell you what, I thought it was really discernible and easy to tell when the Steelers were done with Deontay Johnson and when they were done with Chase Claypool. I thought it was really easy to tell. The murmurs you kind of heard at the combine, the murmurs you heard midseason, like those were pretty easy pickup and tells. I just don't get the same vibe right now with George Pickens. They were kind of – you felt with Deontay Johnson after the combine, he was gone. You felt Chase Claypool approaching midseason. They got the right offer, and boy, did they were going to move him. And so I just think I don't see that vibe. I don't think they hide that a lot. When the Steelers are trying to trade a guy, it's generally not too hard to pick up on, to be quite honest with you. And so I don't feel that vibe with George Pickens right now. And again, both sides of that argument have a lot of validity to it. I think it's a really tough position to be in as a general manager. I also think Omar Khan did it to himself in many respects, though, by not landing a difference maker last year.
Absolutely. That's part of the equation. We got to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about the offensive line. Omar Khan did reveal at least what the Steelers plan to do with the offensive line, particularly with Broderick Jones. We'll discuss that and what Nick Farabaugh thinks on that subject next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, to remind you, this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the number one sportsbook in America. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just beginning on FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook, because FanDuel is your home for NBA live betting. So even if you missed the first few minutes of the game or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can make your picks from the first whistle until the final buzzer. Plus, if you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. However you want to play, now is the perfect time to join. New FanDuel customers can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your one shot at $150 in bonus bets if you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. Make every moment more with FanDuel Sportsbook, official sports betting partner of the NBA. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh, breaking things down. Nick, let's get to another thing that Omar Khan said. And listen, there were several other things that he addressed, but I wanted to talk about some of the bigger names, some of the bigger stories when it came to this situation, because when we looked at how this was playing out, we wanted to look at those higher picks, right? Like the futures. And Broderick Jones was the first pick of the Omar Khan era. Did not have the best second year. I didn't think he was objectively terrible, but he needed to show progress, and he didn't. But part of the question is also been, hey, he's not supposed to be the right tackle. He's supposed to be the left tackle. And Omar Khan addressed that a little bit. So here's one question addressing Omar Khan on the side of just Pat Meyer and what the offensive line needs to do, and then also addressing the future of Broderick Jones.
When you guys invested so heavily in the offensive line, you've made Pat Meyer a really important position coach for you. How do you evaluate the job that he's done developing some of this young talent, especially guys like Broderick?
Yeah, we ended the season last year with 5 straight losses, and that's unacceptable. But not just the offensive line, everywhere we got to be better. I mean, we have to be self-aware, and we got to look ourselves in the mirror, and that goes for players, coaches, entire organization, top to bottom. And we got to ask ourselves, what went wrong and why, and how do we fix it? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? And we have to get better.
Speaking of the offensive line, when it comes to Broderick Jones, last year you said that he's eventually going to be a left tackle. Do you foresee him being your starting left tackle?
I'd say it's a safe assumption that going into this, that he'll be the left tackle.
And I think it should be a safe assumption, Nick, because that's what you got him to be. I talked about this last year when they drafted Troy Fautanu. Like that guy, yes, he played left tackle at Washington, but their left tackle was the front tackle because his quarterback was Michael Penix and he was left-handed. So you wanted Troy Fautanu with his build to maybe be that right tackle that could be more of that experienced bully, and you want Broderick Jones to work out. But Nick, Broderick still has a lot of fundamental issues, in my opinion. Like when you look at the way that he plays, he still doesn't get his hands to the right spot all the time. He did deal with injuries this past year. But what does Broderick Jones have to do if he's going to be the Steelers franchise left tackle moving forward?
Consistency. I mean, that's the big thing. You see flashes of it. Like you see flashes of the guy you thought he was going to be. And it's just being consistent. I mean, the technique is all over the place. Sometimes it's great and you're like, yes, there it is. And just on a down-to-down basis, sometimes he'll have a great pancake in the run game. Sometimes he'll do the entirely wrong thing. I think the great example of that is when he pulled
and he ran
against
right
the Ravens. It's just the basics, man. It's just the basics sometimes. I think it's just sometimes he's just got to keep, his head in the game. The down-to-down consistency with him is a roller coaster. I mean, it really is. It's a blown assignment. It's a sack. It's a pancake. It's a teach tape rep. Like that is a back-to-back. That can be a 4-down sequence with him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing I think with him. He needs to find some consistency. He's very talented. I also do think he doesn't look completely natural on the right side. There's a hitch in his kick step. I could tell he seems a little off still. I think left tackle he feels more comfortable at. He's said that before, even though he won't make excuses for himself. But listen, the mental stuff needs to be cleaned up. But I think that's the biggest thing Broderick can do. If he can get the basics down, I think you can start to build a base from there. And getting him back to his spot where he's more comfortable at will help him. It will help him play a little freer, help him play a little faster. And that's usually a good kind of elements. Those are good elements to kind of put together.
No, I agree. Those are elements that need to be put together. But I also think part of this is, the Steelers, you mentioned, like he looked uncomfortable at that right side. Nick, how many times have we heard that recently about guys not feeling comfortable where they're playing? Kendrick Green at center, Kevin Dotson at right guard instead of left guard, or was it left instead of right? I always mix it up. But either way, but Kevin Dotson, Kendrick Green not feeling right. And now you're dealing with that with Broderick Jones. And I guess it was different for those guys because Kendrick Green was a third rounder. It's like, buddy, play where you going to play. Kevin Dotson's a fourth rounder. You better play where you going to play, right? But with Broderick Jones, you're the first round pick, and you're the first round pick that was the real start of the rebuild of the offensive line. And they haven't made him the priority. They kind of put him at right tackle because Dan Moore couldn't figure it out. And, then when Troy Fautanu got hurt, Broderick Jones, had to stick it out at right tackle. And to me, that's one of the things that the Steelers need to clean up moving forward. Nick, I know that there's times where, it's upon the offensive lineman to be able to switch across the line. That's supposed to be something that you're supposed to be able to do. But I feel like if the O-line is the priority for this offense to be better and for this offense to put up more points and to be more dominant in the trenches, to be more physical unit, it would behoove them to be in the spots that they expect to be so they can build that chemistry moving forward. And I think those experiments need to end with the Steelers. They need to have those guys in set positions and also have, depth guys ready to go for them behind them just in case they get injured.
Yeah, and I mean, it was interesting. If you remember Broderick Jones' first in-game action, it was against the San Francisco 49ers in week 1. Chuks Corfor suffered a concussion, and he played at left tackle when Dan Moore shifted to right. And then later in the year, it didn't work the same way. It was odd that they prioritized Moore at left over their first-round pick. I think that's a short-sighted move, and it's kind of a criticism I have at times of the Steelers' approach. I think sometimes they're a little too focused on the now. At some point, you do have to have a little bit of long-term foresight. And I think not getting Broderick in at left tackle and just kind of sticking him there. I know it was the plan this year, and Troy Fautanu got hurt. But even when Fautanu came back, I mean, he was practicing at right tackle almost all the time. And that was the question. And then they went to Denver, and they started rotating them. Like, that is what I don't get. You can't rotate tackles and guards and offensive lineman. It doesn't work. And so you got to make these guys as comfortable as possible, especially in Broderick's case. You knew drafting him, he was a little bit of a project, right? He was a young player with one full season of starts under his belt. I think he had 13 career starts at Georgia. He was a little raw. He was athletic. If you want that guy to develop, you put him in the spot that makes him comfortable so he can work on the rest of his game. And so that is the criticism I have for the Steelers. I understand flipping guys. There are guys that can do it. You got to kind of identify it. I think Troy Fautanu is one of those guys that can flip around, play different spots, but not everyone can do it. And so you got to kind of see the mental DNA, work them out, whatever. You got to see that. And Broderick was not one of those guys. And I just think he looks uncomfortable. And when you're trying to rebuild a technical base like he was out of Georgia, that does hurt your development.
And that's got to be the number one thing for this offense is, after quarterback is figuring out this offensive line because, again, quarterback's not supposed to be the strength of this team, but if they're trying to build to be like the Eagles, they're trying to build it so their offensive line is the strength of this offense. It is the core that makes everything else easier. That way, say they get their Saquon Barkley someday where say they get that star running back, power in their offense, that they have the offensive line to allow them to maximize it. That's what the Eagles did so well. And they've talked about wanting to be like the Eagles and, Howie Roseman coming out and saying we're going to keep drafting offensive defensive linemen because that's an awesome thing to do. That's the Eagles philosophy. That's what the Steelers are trying to adopt with Andy Weidel in their front office. So it's why we're talking about defensive line because that's a priority for the Steelers is getting stronger there too. And I wouldn't put it past the Steelers to explore offensive line additions somewhere for depth or if they don't feel comfortable with Isaac Seumalo at left guard this year. And I'm not saying that they won't, but I think they're keeping all those options on the table. But part of that needs to be whatever their plan is as far as adding. They need this chemistry to get right. They have the chunk of guys. Omar Khan also expressed confidence. And I thought one of the more booming confidence statements that he gave was on Mason McCormick. When asked about him and how well they felt he fit in this past year, I think that kind of shows Mason McCormick, is part of the future right now for the Steelers. And so right now you have 5 guys there that are obvious starters. Jones at left tackle, Seumalo at left guard, Frazier at center, McCormick at right guard, and Fautanu at right tackle. And you have those 5 there. And then you can even say the 4 of those guys that aren't to Isaac Seumalo, they could be your future core of this offensive line that makes you a power running team, a team that controls the line of scrimmage again, something the Steelers haven't really done in 6 years, 7 years. It's been a while since they've had an O-line like that. And I think that's something that if you're going to get it right, you need Broderick Jones to be a piece of that because he was drafted to be one of the keystones of that.
Yeah, he's a huge part of it. If he hits versus if he doesn't, massive difference, right? If he has a bad year at left tackle, they need a left tackle and a left guard. They need 2 starters on the O-line then versus 1, right? Because Seumalo's contract's up next year. I will say, when I look at the O-line, I like it. And I like Frazier was a stud year 1. I thought McCormick played well. I really like where Fautanu is going. I know the injury is a bummer, but I think he's a good player. We'll see where Jones goes. Seumalo started to show a little bit of decline. He's 31. He's going to be 32. I do wonder if this is a sleeper position. It's guard. I just wonder if they have the cap space. If they want to, they could take a swing at that market. I wonder if they would just because of how trench focused they are. And listen, there's no big contracts coming up on that position front for 3 more seasons. So if you wanted to, you could take a big swing at offensive line and free agency. We'll see. The guard class is fine. There's guys like Trey Smith, Mekhi Becton, Kevin Zeitler. It's not a super plentiful group. James Daniels, of course, is in there too. But if they wanted to take a swing, they could. But it is a growing conglomerate together. They put so much into that room. They really need it to boom because otherwise, when we talk about quarterback and the future of quarterback, the best quarterback situations people walk into are teams like the Vikings, where Sam Darnold is surrounded by talent at receiver, at offensive line. You've got to quarterback-proof the offense. It's kind of what I would be aiming to do if I were Omar Khan. I want to QB-proof it and give a rookie or Justin Fields or whatever the best possible situation in 2025, 2026, et cetera.
Absolutely. He's Nick Farabaugh. Nick, thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, you can follow me on X, Twitter at FarabaugHFB. Make sure to read the stuff over at PennLive.com. Make sure to follow the YouTube channel, Steelers on Penn Live.
Absolutely. He's Nick Farabaugh. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those Monday through Friday episodes. You can also check me out on social media, whether it's Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, all the places. Same handle every time, at Carter Critiques. read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Back here tomorrow with more on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Check it out here when we come on to the next episode here at the Combine after the first day of talking to players.